everybody. Welcome to our second embroidery class recap video. So today we're going to go over the stitches that we learned in our second class, which is on December 1st. So if you missed that, or if you need a refresher, you're in the right place. We are going to be starting with the split stitch. And for the split stitch, you want to be using an even number of threads. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 12, whatever you want. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with some embroidery floss. That's the one that has the 6 strands twisted together. And I'm going to show you how to split these threads. So the great thing about this stuff is you can double it up in your needle and knot it down here and be working with 12 threads. This is awesome if you want a really thick text or something. You can do the split stitch with all 12 threads. If you only want to be working with 6, you can thread this like we normally do, a single, a single thread with your little tail, and you can, that'll be 6. If you only want it, you want to do a little thin line of some kind, say you only want to be working with 4, I'm going to show you how to split this right now. So we are going to split this into 4 and 2 because, sorry, 4 and 2 because we're working with 6 threads here. So if you look, I'm going to hold this up here. If you pull these apart, you've got 6 little threads that are all twisted together. Okay, so I'm going to pull this out and I'm going to find 2 that seem to be kind of next to each other in the twist. If you can't find 2 that are right next to each other, that's okay. Just grab 2 and 4. Here we go. Okay, 2 and 4. So I'm using a short one. You wouldn't want to try to split an entire skein of floss the same way that you're sewing with thread that goes from like finger to shoulder for the longest. Same thing with splitting this. So cut your thread that you want to use and then split it. So I'm divided 4 and 2, and I'm going to sort of use both hands here. I'm going to hold my 4 and 2 in my left hand. And with my right hand, I'm going to kind of untwist this and then run my finger in the middle. And then when I let go of it, muscle memory takes over and the threads want to retwist. So just go slow and pull those apart. Okay. Voila. So now I have 4 and 2. So for what we're going to do today with the split stitch, why don't you grab what you have of your 4 threads, and again, working with a thread that's the length of your finger to your shoulder would be good, or maybe a little bit shorter. But what we're going to work on now is filling in our letters, the E or the O, or your tail feathers. So whatever you want for that. I'm going to actually start with filling in the O. So if you want to go right along with me, use whatever color you want for your O. Okay. And then go ahead and thread these 4 threads onto your needle. I've got one ready to go. Double it up. So I've got my thread running through here, and then I've knotted both ends together like this. I'm actually going to work with 6 so that I've got all 12 threads because it's easier for you to see on the video, but you're going to be working with the 4 threads doubled up, making 8. Does that make sense? Whew, I feel like I need another cup of coffee, or maybe less coffee. All right, I'm going to switch over to my overhead camera so this is easier for y'all to see. There we go. All right, so you've got your quirky bird. This is mine that's almost done, but what we're going to be working on today is your O in hello. And then we're also going to be using that split stitch for your tail feathers. And we're also going to be learning the stitch to work on your beak. So real quick, if you don't have your quirky bird drawn on your hoop, I'm going to go over that. So here's my 6-inch hoop. And I'm going to draw my little tail feathers over here. It doesn't matter how many you have, 3 or 4. Here's the back of my bird, which we worked on in the first class. Here's his body. We also did the wing last time. Give yourself a beak to work on today. Okay, little eyeball. All right, and then the word hello. Or I know some of you are making your text say something a little bit different. That is fine. It's your project. And that's what we're going to be doing today. Okay. Here we go. So I'm going to draw a circle like we're working on the O in hello. All right, there's my circle. I've got my thread doubled up, knotted. I'm going to come from the back, anywhere on my O, pull that up, check in the back to make sure my knot is pulled taut against the fabric. I'm going to go forward 1 stitch length. When you're working on curves, a smaller stitch is better because you're going to get more of a visual curve here. If you did big stitches, you'd get like more of a stop sign over here. So we're going to work in fairly small stitches. I'm going to go here. Pull that forward 1 stitch. Okay, now here's where we're gonna split our stitches. This is called the split stitch because we literally split our stitches. I'm gonna pop my needle up. Takes a little poke and there we go. So if you can see that, I found the spot in between my 2 threads. So there should be 6 on one side and 6 on the other for me. And for y'all, you're gonna have 4 on each side. Pull this forward. Okay. So I've split my stitches, looks good on the back, nothing's hanging out. I'm going to come forward 1 stitch length and go back in. Oops. I hooked my hardware. There we go. All right. Forward 1. Now already my thread's a little bit twisty, so it's going to be kind of hard to find the middle. So I'm going to try to get those 2 threads to lay flat next to each other when I pull this through. Okay, that's better. There it is. That might not be 6 and 6. That might be 7 and 5. I'm okay with that. Forward 1 stitch length. Okay, so you're just going to do this all around your shape. So this is really good for lines. It's great for text. It ends up kind of looking like a little bit of a braid when it's done. But it's nice because you can vary, again, like I said at the beginning, how many threads you use for really different effects. If you did this with 2 threads versus 12 threads, it's going to look very, very different. Forward, forward, forward I go. All right, and then I'm just going to show you on my little quirky bird here. This is the split stitch. These green and yellow ones. I just alternated going in concentric. Well, they're not circles, they're tail feather shapes, but concentric circles around the shape. And I started at the outside and worked my way in. Over here, I just had 1 little tiny stitch. You can also start at the inside of a shape and work your way out. But this is great for lines. It's also good for filling shapes. It's really good for like sort of awkward blobby shapes. So this is a fun one. Split stitch is one of my favorite stitches. I use it all the time. So I'm going to come right back when I've finished my circle. You can keep working on yours too if you're working along with me, but I shall return. All right, here's my last split stitch of my O. I'm going to pull this through. Now it depends what you're working on. You can either end just by going right next to your first stitch, or you can go back in the top. It's really going to depend what kind of thread you're working with. I'm going to go back in the, like, resplit my first stitch to end. Okay, so here's my O. You can see over here, I used a little bit too big of a stitch and I didn't get a nice curve there. I got nice curves over here, but I was rushing over here and I kind of got a, that's okay. I'm not overly worried about it, but just to keep in mind, go slow with this one, especially on curves. All right, turn this over. Remember our knotting off skill. I'm going to find the closest stitch, pop my needle under it. And then I'm going to go through the loop, tie my knot. This works even when you're working with a double thread. There we go. Okay, that's your split stitch. So we're going to move on to the satin stitch. The satin stitch is basically parallel threads sewn from edge to edge of a closed shape. So I did it on this O. And we're going to do a variation on the satin stitch, which is the raised satin stitch. And how about this? The raised satin stitch is made by making your satin stitch over the outline of your split stitch there. So you can use your 2 threads that were left over from when you split your embroidery floss, or you can use something else. Again, so that it's easy for you all to see, I'm going to use this fat pearl cotton. I'm going to use a single strand of it. You can do satin stitch with anything. The fewer threads you use, the nicer it will look, because these are going to be laid parallel to each other, side by side, no spaces. So if you're using 12 threads, they can sort of get twisted and you don't get that nice smooth satiny top on them. But experiment and you get different effects. So for satin stitch, a raised satin stitch, we're going to come up in the middle of our shape. You want to start in the middle and work your way out to one side, and then finish that off and start in the middle and work your way back out. Okay, so I'm going to come up just outside of my shape. Got a knot in my thread. Oops, look at this. I pulled my knot through. That's why we trim those short. Come through and get that out of here. Maybe. This is exactly why we keep the back as neat as possible. There, I got it. Okay. So there we go. That's nice and taut. Now I'm going to come across at a diagonal for how it's going to be seen. You don't have to come at a diagonal. That's just recommended. Again, it makes it more visually pleasing. I could totally work in vertical stitches. And with an O, it kind of doesn't matter because it's, you know, depending on which way you hold it, it's vertical or diagonal. So I'm going to come across. This angle that I choose is the angle I'm stuck with. So I'm going to come across here, go right in on the side of my outline. I'm going to send my needle in at a little bit of an angle towards the center. Pull that through. Okay, that's my first satin stitch. Now I could come up right next to it, or I could come around next to it, the side where I came in before. This method uses a little bit more thread because you're wrapping, you're basically doing the satin stitch on the back as well, but I find it easier to line up my my stitches that way and get them nice and neat and parallel. So I'm gonna sacrifice my thread to the cause. I did just pull my stuff up here again. So for the sake of time, I'm gonna leave it. I'm going to pull my thread across parallel right next to my previous stitch, back in. There we go. So this is again a raised satin stitch. This split stitch outline pops my satin stitch up off of the fabric surface and gives it more of like a pillowy padded 3D effect. Caught in my knot. Another thing to think about if you want that sort of 3D effect, if you're working in a really large space, this little O isn't even an inch across, so this works great. If I was doing this whole hoop in a satin stitch, I would want to come in and just put some little straight stitches in underneath, or you can do your regular satin stitch, which I would just draw my shape and just do exactly what I'm doing here without the split stitch around. So I could do my satin stitch going one direction, and then I could come back and do it again in a perpendicular direction. That's really going to give it a raised pillowy effect, and that works for big spaces. Obviously that uses a ton of thread, but that's another option if you really want your stitch to stick up off the fabric surface. Because this is so small a space, the tension from edge to edge is enough to keep my thread elevated. But if it was a really big space, I would need some other stuff under there holding my thread up. So this is it. I go from edge to edge. It would be the same thing if I was just working on a pencil line. Obviously, I'm working on a circle. It gets more narrow as I work towards the edge, so my stitches get a little bit shorter. And that is the satin stitch. So I'll just continue. Now, when I get to the edge over here, the smart thing to do would be to tie off my thread, cut it off, tie a new knot, and then come back here and start working in the other direction. That's up to you, though, if you want to just jump over. Okay, so same way I finish it. Let's pretend I'm done. On the back, underneath, through my hoop. And that's that. Okay, that is the satin stitch. Sorry, the raised satin stitch. Again, that's how I did this here. Now we're going to move on to a second variation of the satin stitch, which is called the long and short. And this is great for using multiple colors of thread and having them sort of join together. If you use 3 or more colors, you get a really beautiful color gradient. But we're just going to use 2 and do it on our beak. If you don't want your beak to be 2 colors, you can still practice this stitch using the same color thread for the top and bottom. So for that one, we're going to draw our beak shape. Here's my triangle. Here's his eye. Now I'm going to just sort of mark out with my pencil the midline, and then I'm going to go a short distance above the midline and make a mark, and then about that same distance down here and make a line. So I'm going to use these for reference to where my stitches should go. Here is my beak. I'm going to continue using this blue thread that I was using for the O because it's already on my needle. You can use any 2 colors that you want for this. All right, and again, this is the long and short stitch. It's a variation of the satin stitch, so basically the same technique. I'm going to start up here at the top. I'm going to start with a long stitch. So my long stitches are going to come to this bottom line that I drew. And my short stitches are going to come to the top line. There's a long. Now it's a satin stitch, so I'm going to go right next to it on my pencil line. There it is. But I'm going to do a short stitch this time. So I'm going to go to this top line that I drew. You don't have to be so exact with this if you don't want to. If you don't want to have guidelines, if you want to have it be a little bit more willy-nilly, you can. But this is a method if you want sort of exact, sort of intertwining stitches. So again, coming up right next to it. And it's a long stitch because I'm alternating. So I'm going to go down to my bottom line. And so you see, I've got a little gap here. And we're going to use that with our second color. Short stitch. Long stitch down to the bottom. So again, basically the same as the satin stitch, except for that we're doing this long, short variation. All right, that's as far as I'm going to go for the sake of the video. I'm going to go on to the second color. I'm going to work with this brown. I've already got it threaded up with a knot in the end. Got my little tail here. I'm going to start on the same line that I started on with the blue. And I'm going to come up and I'm going to meet it here. You can go in right down the same hole or just as close to it as you can get. Again, these decisions are sort of based on the thread that you're using and the type of fabric. So there's my first short stitch on this one. I'm going to follow my pencil line of my beak, come up right next to it, okay, and fill in the gap with a long stitch. Funny story, I was embroidering the other day and I was working in my lap instead of on a table, and I had totally sewn my piece to my sweater. So that's something to watch out for. All right, going up to meet that long stitch with a short stitch. That's it. This is the long and short. Now on your quirky bird, we're working in a triangle here, so it's going to get skinnier and skinnier and skinnier. And by the time you get to the end of your beak, you're not going to have these short and long line guidelines to work with anymore. So you're going to have to use some artistic license to decide how that goes. There you go. That's that. So on mine, I kind of just decided that it was just going to have a little tiny yellow one at the end, and these green ones got a little bit longer. So I feel good about it. All right, there's your long and short. Okay, woo, all right. We are trucking right along on this one. This is great. So those are the stitches that we covered in the second class, and we did a little bonus stitch called couching. Now, couching is going to use yarn. So if you want to follow along, go ahead and pause your video and grab some yarn. And what we did with the quirky bird is I put yarn and did couching for the bottom of its body. I've got the navy blue yarn over here and this turquoise yarn over here. Your couching, if you have a really fat needle with a big eye, you can run this through and have your thread come through from the back. Here's my navy blue one. I ran it through my fabric, had it come up to the top. And then over here, I didn't run it back down through the fabric, and I've got these fun little like fraying tail feathers going on. Same thing over here. I gave them like a turkey waddle situation with that yarn. So for couching, I highly recommend drawing a line. Couching is awesome for doing loops and crazy lines, or you can just, do the outline of your bird down here. Doesn't matter. It's great for everything, but it's a really fun, loosey-goosey technique. So there's my line. I'm going to take my yarn. I'm not going to have this run through my fabric. So to keep this from fraying too much, because this yarn I happen to know frays a lot, I'm going to tie a little knot in the end. There's that. So that'll be where I start, and I'm going to have a frayed end for fun because I want to. Okay, so for couching, what we're going to do is we're basically going to be tacking your yarn to the top of your fabric. So I'm choosing a contrasting color. You can, of course, use a matching color thread if you don't want your this thread to show. So this is a design choice. I enjoy the look of the couching with contrasting thread. So I did the navy blue here with yellow and then added red just for funsies. It didn't need all those stitches. So I'm going to lay my yarn down on my line. I'm going to pop my, oops, I still have needles attached to my piece. Whoop, let's get rid of those. Trying again, laying this down. I'm going to come up from the bottom with my knotted thread just to the side of my pencil line. Okay. Now, actually, I can just really roll this out of the way, and I want to come back really, really close to where I came out. I'm basically just making a little loop. I'm not going down the same line or down the same hole, but right next to it. Okay. And whoop, tacked my yarn down. Okay, that's it. Hey, I just couched. Cool. All right, and then again, stitch length, this is an aesthetic choice here. I'm gonna come a little bit further down my pencil line. There it is. Now, if you're doing really curvy lines, again, sort of like with this, you want to keep your stitches closer together so you can keep that nice visual curve. Go in right next to it on my pencil line. And pull this through. This is a great technique. You can add beads or sequins onto your yarn or even onto your tacking thread. So this is a really great, fun sort of embellishing technique. Over the top. Okay. So that's that. So I would just continue on and you just sort of work your yarn where you want it, bit by bit, stitch by stitch as you go. Okay, that is couching. Again, here's how I used it on mine. So what did we learn today? We learned couching. We learned the long and short stitch where 2 different colors or 3 different colors intertwine. We did the raised satin stitch here, which was the parallel line stitches right next to each other over a closed shape. And to make it raised, we put it over our split stitch. And this is the split stitch used decoratively in alternating colors. So, yay! That's that. So for homework, quote unquote, if you want to continue working on your quirky bird, because we're going to finish it up in class 3, I would say go ahead and finish up everything on your quirky bird that's highlighted in pink here. And then next time we're going to learn some stitches. We're going to fill in the wing and we're going to give it some ground to stand on. So we're just going to learn 2 stitches next time that are really fun fill stitches. So for homework, finish the word hello or whatever text you want up here. Fill in those tail feathers and definitely fill in the beak any way you want. Okay. Thanks for joining me for this, and hopefully I'll see you on December 15th for class number 3. Bye.